A thug kicks a service dog at a downtown bus stop, sending the golden retriever yelping to the ground while his disabled veteran owner crashes onto the concrete, trying to help. The bully stands over both victims, laughing as other passengers look away in fear. But the quiet old man sitting on the bench isn't just another bystander. This is Jackie Chan himself. The punk has no idea he just tortured an innocent animal in front of a martial arts master who spent 60 years protecting the helpless with lightning-fast precision. While the thug threatens the wounded veteran for more money, the legend rises from his seat with that deadly calm that made him famous. The disabled soldier recognizes his unlikely savior and watches in amazement as justice prepares to strike. The bully keeps ranting about fake service dogs and worthless veterans, completely unaware that he's about to learn why some heroes never age out of delivering pain. What happens when you kick a dog in front of the wrong old man? Will the thug survive discovering that real kung fu isn't just movie magic? What happened next would terrorize the bully for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against the cracked pavement of Burnside Street, turning the downtown Portland morning into a symphony of urban melancholy. Frank Morrison pulled his worn Vietnam veteran's cap lower over his gray hair, the fabric darkened with moisture from the drizzle that seemed to seep into everything in this city. At 68, his joints protested the damp weather, but he'd learned long ago that some discomforts were simply part of the bargain of growing old. Buddy, his golden retriever service dog, sat alert beside the bench, his intelligent brown eyes scanning the early commuters who shuffled past like ghosts in the mist. The dog's official vest was perfectly positioned, marking him as what he was, a lifeline, not a pet. Frank's trembling hand found the familiar comfort of Buddy's fur, and immediately the tremor calmed. 3 years together, and the dog still amazed him with his intuitive understanding of when the old soldier needed grounding. "We can't be late today, boy," Frank murmured, checking his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The VA appointment was crucial, a follow-up that couldn't be rescheduled without weeks of bureaucratic gymnastics. His hip ached from yesterday's fall in his apartment, a reminder that his body was betraying him one piece at a time. 3 feet away on the same bench, an unassuming Asian man in his 70s sat reading the Portland Tribune. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose, and his simple gray windbreaker looked like something from a discount store. He held the newspaper with careful precision, turning pages with the methodical patience of someone who had nowhere urgent to be. When a car backfired somewhere down the street, Frank's entire body jerked in response, his breath catching. The older man glanced over, his kind eyes meeting Frank's for just a moment. A gentle smile crossed his weathered features, not pity, but understanding. Frank managed a small nod in return. There was something calming about the stranger's presence, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. The morning routine of the city continued around them. Street cleaners pushed their carts past storefront windows, and early commuters clutched coffee cups like talismans against the gray dawn. Frank positioned himself carefully on the bench, keeping his back to the wall so he could see all approaches, a habit that would never leave him. No matter how many years passed since the jungle. Buddy's ears suddenly perked up, his body tensing slightly. The dog's training kicked in as he sensed the shift in his handler's anxiety. Frank's breathing had become shallow, his pulse quickening, as the familiar weight of hypervigilance settled over him like an old, unwelcome coat. "Easy, boy," Frank whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was comforting the dog or himself. The Asian man carefully folded a section of his newspaper, the crisp sound cutting through the ambient noise of the awakening city. His movements were economical, precise, the kind of efficiency that came from a lifetime of deliberate practice. When he glanced at Frank again, there was something different in his expression. Not intrusion, but a quiet readiness, as if he sensed the same disturbance that had put Buddy on alert. From the direction of the underpass, a figure emerged through the morning mist. Tall, agitated, moving with the aggressive swagger of someone looking for trouble to justify his anger. Frank's trained eyes took in the details automatically. Unkempt, 3 days without a proper meal, the particular desperation of someone with nothing left to lose and a dangerous need to blame someone else for it. Derek Mullins was heading straight for them. Derek Mullins cut through the morning drizzle like a blade of barely contained rage. His tall frame moved with the false confidence of a man who had learned that intimidation could substitute for actual strength, at least when applied to the right targets. 3 days of stubble couldn't hide the weakness in his jaw and his bloodshot eyes spoke of too many nights spent nursing grievances instead of solutions. He stopped directly in front of Frank, close enough that the elderly veteran had to look up to meet his gaze. The positioning was deliberate. Derek had perfected the art of using his height to make others feel small. His clothes reeked of stale alcohol and the particular sourness that came from sleeping in places not meant for human habitation. "Nice dog you got there, old man," Derek said, his voice carrying a tone that made the compliment sound like a threat. Frank's military training kicked in, recognizing the predatory assessment in the younger man's eyes. "Thank you," he replied carefully, keeping his voice neutral. "He's a good boy." Derek's laugh held no humor. "Must be nice, having everything handed to you. Government checks, free healthcare, special treatment." He gestured vaguely at Buddy's service vest, his lip curling with disdain. "While real Americans like me get to struggle for scraps." The Asian man's newspaper rustled softly as he turned a page, but Frank noticed the subtle shift in the stranger's posture. Still relaxed, still reading, but somehow more present. Alert. "I earned my benefits through service," Frank said quietly, trying to keep the conversation from escalating. His hands wanted to shake, but Buddy's warm presence against his leg helped him maintain control. "It wasn't handed to me." Derek's resentment found its target. "Service? You mean losing? You and your whole generation, marching off to lose wars, and then coming home expecting parades." His voice rose with each word, drawing glances from other commuters who quickly looked away. "Vietnam, right? How'd that work out for you, hero?" The words hit Frank like physical blows, each one designed to find the soft spots that never quite healed. He'd heard variations of this attack before, but it never got easier. The weight of survivors' guilt, of a war that ended badly, of friends who never made it home. All of it came rushing back in Derek's sneering voice. "We did our duty," Frank managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your duty?" Derek laughed. Again, louder this time. "Your duty was to win, and you failed. Now you want sympathy for your fake problems and your fake dog." He pointed at Buddy, who remained perfectly still despite the rising tension. "I bet that's just a scam anyway. Train any mutt to wear a vest, and suddenly you get to take him everywhere, get special parking spots, make everyone feel sorry for you." The Asian man carefully folded his newspaper, the sound sharp in the morning air. His movements remained unhurried, but there was something different now, a coiled quality, like a spring being slowly compressed. Derek stepped closer to Frank, invading his personal space with practiced aggression. "You probably coached him to act all special, didn't you? What's he supposed to do? Catch you when you have one of your episodes. Alert everyone when the big bad veteran is having feelings." Frank's breath came faster now, the familiar signs of panic beginning to build. Buddy immediately responded, moving closer and applying gentle pressure against Frank's leg, exactly what he was trained to do. The dog's calm professionalism in the face of Derek's hostility only seemed to inflame the younger man's anger. "Look at that," Derek pointed accusingly. "Perfect timing, right? You probably gave him some secret signal. What a convenient performance." The morning commuters continued to stream past, their eyes carefully averted. This was urban America in the 21st century. Everyone had somewhere to be, and other people's problems were exactly that. Other people's that Derek's face twisted with self-righteous fury. "You think you're some kind of hero? You and all your veteran buddies, acting like the world owes you something. Well, here's a news flash, old man. You lost that war. You're nothing but a failure with a fake dog, taking resources away from people who actually deserve them." Derek's words hung in the damp morning air like poison gas, each syllable designed to strip away whatever dignity Frank Morrison still possessed. The elderly veteran's hands began their familiar tremor, not from Parkinson's this time, but from the deeper shaking that came when the past and present collided in his damaged mind. "Please," Frank whispered, his voice cracking like old paper. "I just want to make my appointment." But Derek heard weakness where Frank intended peace, and weakness was blood in the water to a predator. "Please," he mocked, adopting a whining tone. Please what? Please keep pretending you're something special? Please keep taking benefits from people who actually earn them. Other commuters flowed around the confrontation like water around rocks, their faces carefully blank. A few pulled out phones, but Frank knew they were more likely capturing content for social media than calling for help. This was the world now. Witnessing suffering was entertainment, not a call to action. But he remained perfectly positioned, his golden fur damp from the drizzle, his brown eyes alert but calm. 3 years of training had prepared him for exactly this scenario, when his handler faced stress that threatened to overwhelm his coping mechanisms. The dog's solid presence against Frank's leg was an anchor in a storm that was building toward something terrible. Look at me when I'm talking to you. Derek's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you turn away from me. Frank tried to explain, his words coming in broken fragments. Buddy, he's a legitimate service animal. He has certification. I can show you. He fumbled for his wallet with trembling fingers, desperate to prove his right to exist in this space with his companion. Derek's laugh was ugly, filled with years of accumulated resentment toward a world that had failed to recognize his inherent specialness. Certification? You can buy those online for $20. I've seen the websites. Any loser can get a fake service dog vest, and suddenly they're disabled. The Asian man on the bench hadn't moved, but something had changed in the quality of his stillness. His newspaper remained open, but his eyes were no longer tracking the printed words. Instead, they had found Derek's face, studying it with the patient attention of someone cataloging important details. I bet you trained him yourself, Derek continued, warming to his theme. Taught him a few tricks, made him act scared when you have your little episodes. What's the scam? PTSD? Everyone's got PTSD now. It's the get-out-of-work-free card for losers who can't handle real life. Frank's breathing became shallow, rapid. The signs were unmistakable to anyone who knew trauma responses. He was being triggered not just by Derek's words, but by the public nature of the humiliation, the way other people looked through him as if he were invisible. But he pressed closer. His warm weight a reminder that Frank wasn't alone, wasn't helpless. You want to know what I think? Derek's voice rose to a pitch that could be heard half a block away. I think you and every other veteran crying about your service are just professional victims. You went overseas, you screwed up, and now you want the whole world to feel sorry for you. A businessman in an expensive suit paused near the bus stop, saw the confrontation, and immediately pulled out his phone. But instead of calling 911, he held it up to record. Within seconds, Frank realized he was being filmed, his humiliation, captured for strangers to judge and share. Derek noticed the phone too, and it energized him. Perfect. Someone should document this. Show the world what these fake heroes really are. Panhandlers in uniform, using their dead buddies for sympathy points. The words struck Frank like a physical blow. His friends who hadn't made it home, Tommy Reeves, who died in his arms in a rice paddy 48 years ago, Marcus Williams, who made it back but ate his gun 6 months later, Danny Chun, who overdosed in a VA parking lot because the waiting list for treatment was too long. Their memories deserved better than being used as weapons in a one-sided assault. They weren't fake, Frank managed, his voice barely audible. They were real. They were good men. Derek sensed the deepest wound and pressed harder. Good men? Good men don't lose wars, old man. Good men don't come home broken and useless, begging for handouts with their trained animals. Buddy shifted position, responding to the spike in Frank's heart rate and the change in his breathing pattern. The dog moved to stand between Derek and Frank, not aggressively, but protectively, exactly as he'd been trained to do when his handler faced a threat. And that simple act of loyalty became the spark that ignited Derek's violence. Get that mutt away from me, Derek snarled, his face flushing red with rage at being challenged by anything, even a well-trained dog doing his job. The morning seemed to pause, as if the city itself held its breath. But he stood between Derek and Frank, golden fur darkened by the drizzle, his stance neither aggressive nor submissive, simply present, doing what 3 years of training had taught him to do when his handler faced a threat. The dog's brown eyes remained fixed on Derek's face, reading the human's intentions with the clarity that came from generations of breeding and months of specialized training. I said, get that mutt away from me. Derek's voice pitched higher, the sound of a man whose authority had been questioned by something he considered beneath him. Frank struggled to rise from the bench, his arthritis and old war wounds making every movement a negotiation with pain. "He's just doing his job," he managed, his voice strained. "But he's not aggressive. He's trained to. I don't care what he's trained to do." Derek's face had gone red, veins standing out on his forehead. "No dog challenges me. No fake veteran challenges me. And definitely no government freeloader thinks he can disrespect me with his scam animal." The businessman with the phone moved closer, drawn by the promise of viral content. Other commuters slowed their morning rush, forming a loose circle of witnesses who maintained careful distance while ensuring they had good sight lines. In the age of social media, human suffering was content, and content was currency. The Asian man's hands stilled completely on his newspaper. No more turning pages, no more adjusting his glasses, just absolute focus on the scene unfolding before him. His breathing remained steady, but something fundamental had shifted in his posture. Where before he had seemed like a harmless elderly man passing time, now he radiated the kind of coiled potential that suggested decades of training in things more serious than reading newspapers. Derek took a step back and deliberately pulled his right leg back, the motion unmistakable in its intent. "Maybe a little pain will teach this mutt some respect." "Please," Frank gasped, finally managing to get to his feet despite the sharp protest from his hip. "Please don't hurt him. He's just protecting me. It's what he's trained to do." But Derek was beyond reasoning. 3 days of sleeping rough, of nursing resentments that had grown toxic in his mind, of looking for someone to blame for the disappointment his life had become. All of it focused down to this moment, this target, this chance to feel powerful by destroying something innocent and defenseless. "Nobody disrespects me," Derek said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than his shouting had. "Not even a dog." The kick came fast and vicious, Derek's boot connecting with Buddy's ribs with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a side of beef. The golden retriever's yelp of pain and surprise cut through the morning air, a sound so pure in its innocence and confusion that it seemed to silence even the city traffic for a heartbeat. Buddy stumbled sideways, his legs tangling as the pain shot through his body. The impact had been precise, calculated to cause maximum hurt without being immediately fatal. This wasn't random violence. It was deliberate cruelty designed to inflict suffering on both the animal and the man who loved him. Frank lunged forward, with a cry that came from somewhere deeper than his throat, somewhere in the part of his soul that had never stopped being a soldier, never stopped believing that you protected those who couldn't protect themselves. But his 68-year-old body, ravaged by decades of pain and the slow erosion of time, betrayed him at the crucial moment. His legs gave out halfway to his dog, and Frank crashed hard onto the wet concrete. The impact drove the breath from his lungs and sent sharp spikes of agony up his spine. His hands scraped against the rough pavement, drawing blood that mixed with the dirty rainwater pooling in the street. Buddy, despite his own pain, tried to crawl toward his fallen handler. The dog's training overrode his injury. His human was in distress, and that meant Buddy had work to do. But each movement sent fresh waves of agony through his bruised ribs, and his whimpers of pain mixed with Frank's labored breathing to create a symphony of suffering that should have moved anyone. With a functioning conscience, Derek stood over both of them, satisfaction glowing on his face like a fever. He had proven his point, established his dominance, shown these government freeloaders what happened when they forgot their place in the world. The phone cameras captured it all: the broken old man, the injured dog, the triumphant bully standing over his victims like a conqueror. For a moment, the bus stop was silent except for the sound of Buddy's labored breathing and Frank's attempts to crawl toward his companion. The morning commuters stood frozen, witnessing something that crossed a line most of them didn't even know existed. Then a calm voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. "Excuse me, young man." That was very impolite. The voice that cut through the morning air carried the weight of absolute calm, not the false peace of someone avoiding conflict, but the genuine tranquility of someone who had faced every kind of storm and emerged unchanged. Derek turned toward the source, expecting to find another elderly bystander he could intimidate into silence. The Asian man had risen from the bench, his newspaper folded with military precision and placed carefully beside him. He stood perhaps 5'7", his gray windbreaker and wire-rimmed glasses making him appear utterly unremarkable. But something in his posture, the way he held his shoulders, the precise placement of his feet, suggested depths that Derek's limited perception couldn't fathom. "What's it to you, Grandpa?" Derek laughed, the sound harsh against the morning. "Drizzle. You want some too?" The older man took a single step forward, and despite being shorter and decades older than Derek, something about his presence made the younger man unconsciously retreat. It wasn't physical intimidation, it was something far more primal, the recognition that he was facing someone who operated by entirely different rules. "I think you should apologize to the gentleman and his dog," the man said quietly, his accent carrying the faint musical quality of someone who had learned English as a second language but spoke it with careful precision. That Derek's laugh died in his throat as he got his first clear look at the stranger's face. The features were familiar in a way that tickled the back of his memory. High cheekbones, kind eyes that somehow managed to look both gentle and utterly implacable, the particular way he held his head that suggested decades of being photographed from every conceivable angle. "Wait a minute." Derek's voice trailed off as recognition dawned like a slow sunrise. His eyes widened, his mouth falling open in an expression of pure disbelief. "Are you no way? Are you Jackie Chan?" The few commuters who overheard this revelation suddenly looked up from their phones, their morning routine forgotten in the face of genuine celebrity. Phones that had been recording Derek's cruelty now swiveled toward the unassuming man in the gray windbreaker, as if trying to confirm what their eyes were already telling them. The man, Jackie Chan, international movie star, martial arts legend, icon of action cinema for 5 decades, gave a small, modest smile that had graced 1,000 movie posters and red carpet events. But there was steel underneath the politeness now, a hardness that his comedic roles had never revealed. "I am," he said simply, his voice carrying the same gentle authority that had made him beloved worldwide. "And you just hurt my new friends." Dog. Derek's entire world shifted on its axis. This wasn't just some random elderly bystander he could intimidate and dismiss. This was Jackie Chan, actual Jackie Chan, standing 3 feet away, having witnessed every moment of his cruelty. The phones around them multiplied as words spread through the small crowd, but Derek was too stunned to process the implications. Behind them, Frank Morrison lay on the wet concrete, blood seeping from his scraped palms, struggling to reach Buddy. The golden retriever continued his painful crawl toward his handler, each movement a testament to loyalty that transcended physical suffering. Their quiet agony provided a stark counterpoint to Derek's moment of starstruck realization. The morning had just become something entirely different from what any of them had expected. Jackie Chan, for there was no longer any doubt about his identity, knelt beside Frank and Buddy with the fluid grace of someone whose body had been his instrument for 7 decades. His movements were economical, precise, each gesture serving a purpose as he assessed the damage Derek's violence had inflicted. "Sir, I'm going to help you and your friend," Jackie said softly, his voice carrying the warmth that had made him beloved by generations of moviegoers. "What's your name?" Frank Morrison, the elderly veteran managed through gritted teeth, his face pale with pain and embarrassment. "This is Buddy. Is he okay?" Jackie's hands moved over Buddy's ribs with the gentle expertise of someone who had spent decades working with animals on movie sets, someone who understood that a frightened creature needed calm energy more than anything else. The golden retriever, responding to Jackie's peaceful presence, allowed the examination without resistance. "Bruised, but nothing appears broken," Jackie murmured, his fingers finding the tender spots where Derek's boot had connected. "He's a strong boy. Good training, too. He's more worried about you than himself." Derek stood frozen, his phone clutched in his trembling hand, caught between his lingering aggression and the surreal realization that he was in the presence of one of the most famous people on the planet. The morning's power dynamic had shifted, so completely that he couldn't quite process what was happening. "Hey," Derek's voice cracked as he tried to reassert control. "I'm talking to you. Don't ignore me, man. This is incredible, Jackie Chan. Dude, this is so awesome." He held up his phone, switching to selfie mode, his face breaking into a grin that completely ignored the suffering behind him. This is going to be so viral. Jackie Chan and me at a bus stop in Portland. Come on, man, say something cool for the camera. Jackie slowly stood, his expression unchanged, but something in his eyes had gone completely cold. The playful movie star persona that had entertained millions vanished, replaced by something far more serious. This wasn't the Jackie Chan of comedic fight scenes and blooper reels. This was the master martial artist, the man who had spent 50 years perfecting his craft not for entertainment, but for the deeper purpose that real martial arts served. Young man, Jackie said, his voice carrying decades of discipline and training. You seem to have misunderstood something very important. Derek kept grinning, oblivious to the change in atmosphere. Come on, show me some kung fu. This is so cool. My friends are never going to believe this. Jackie Chan. He laughed with the manic energy of someone whose brain couldn't quite process the contradiction between his excitement and the injured veteran bleeding on the ground behind him. The small crowd of commuters had grown, drawn by the commotion and the promise of witnessing something extraordinary. Phones were everywhere now, recording from multiple angles, capturing every word and gesture for immediate upload to social media platforms where the footage would be dissected, shared, and monetized within hours. Whatever, man, Derek continued, his excitement overriding any capacity for reading social cues. It's just a dog, and he started it by getting in my face. You understand, right? Sometimes you gotta show people their place. Jackie's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Around them, the morning continued, traffic flowing past, other buses arriving and departing, the rhythm of urban life proceeding as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and Derek was about to learn that some lines should never be crossed. No, Jackie said quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades studying not just how to fight, but when fighting was necessary. You started it by being cruel. Now you're going to finish it by apologizing and helping clean up the mess you made. Derek's grin faltered for the first time as he began to sense that this encounter wasn't going to unfold the way he had imagined. Derek's expression shifted as he finally began to grasp that Jackie Chan wasn't going to play along with his fantasy of a friendly celebrity encounter. The martial arts legend stood perfectly still, but there was something in his posture that suggested coiled springs, decades of training compressed into a moment of absolute readiness. Come on, man, Derek said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. Don't be like that. This is awesome. You're Jackie Chan. Do some moves for the camera. But Jackie's next words cut through Derek's delusions like a blade through paper. You hurt an innocent animal and an elderly veteran. There's nothing awesome about that. The crowd around them had grown to nearly 20 people, phones held high, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the most unusual street confrontation Portland had seen in years. The morning commuters had forgotten their schedules, their coffee, their carefully planned routines. This was history in the making. Derek's face flushed red as he realized his moment of viral fame wasn't going according to script. Whatever, man. It's just a dog. And the old guy started it by getting in my space with his fake service animal. No, Jackie said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more authority than Derek's shouting ever had. You started it by choosing to be cruel. There's a difference between being strong and being a bully, and you've chosen to be a bully. Derek laughed, but the sound was forced now, desperate. Yeah, right, old man. What are you going to do about it? Karate chop me? This isn't one of your movies, Grandpa. The insult hung in the air for a moment, and something fundamental shifted in Jackie's demeanor. The gentle movie star disappeared entirely, replaced by the martial artist who had spent 7 decades perfecting his craft. His stance widened almost imperceptibly, his weight settling into perfect balance. You're right, Jackie said calmly. This isn't a movie. In movies, the bad guys get to walk away. In real life, actions have consequences. Derek, emboldened by what he mistook for empty threats, took a wild swing at Jackie's head. His fist cut through the air with all the technique of someone whose only fighting experience came from drunken bar brawls and beating up people who couldn't fight back. Jackie simply wasn't there when the punch arrived. The movement was so fluid, so economical, that the cameras barely caught it. One moment Derek was throwing his haymaker, the next he was spinning through the air as Jackie used the younger man's own momentum against him. It wasn't violent. It was physics, leverage, and 60 years of practice transforming aggression into art. Derek found himself face down on the wet pavement, his arm twisted behind his back in a joint lock that made movement impossible without, causing excruciating pain. Jackie's knee rested lightly on his spine, applying just enough pressure to communicate absolute control without causing injury. As I said, Jackie mentioned conversationally, as if discussing the weather, very impolite. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, phones capturing every angle of Derek's humiliation. The bully who had terrorized an elderly veteran and kicked his service dog now lay helpless on the ground, neutralized by a 71-year-old man who had barely seemed to exert himself. "Let me go," Derek gasped, his face pressed against the concrete. "This is assault. You can't do this." Jackie's voice remained perfectly calm. "I'm performing a citizen's arrest for animal cruelty and assault on an elderly person. I suggest you remain still until the authorities arrive." From his position on the ground, Derek could see Frank Morrison struggling to sit up, Buddy crawling determinedly toward his handler despite his injuries. The sight of their continued suffering, contrasted with his own helplessness, began to penetrate even Derek's thick skull. For the first time that morning, he began to understand that he might have made a serious mistake. Jackie maintained the joint lock with the kind of effortless control that spoke to decades of practice, keeping Derek immobilized while applying just enough pressure to ensure compliance without causing permanent damage. Around them, the crowd of onlookers continued filming, their phones capturing every moment of what would soon become the most watched street justice video of the year. "I'm sorry," Derek gasped, his face pressed against the wet concrete. "I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to hurt the dog that bad." Jackie's voice remained steady, professional. "A sincere apology includes helping to fix what you broke. Can you stand without causing trouble?" Derek nodded frantically, and Jackie released the hold, stepping back but remaining ready. The younger man scrambled to his feet, his earlier swagger completely gone, replaced by the desperate energy of someone who had finally realized the magnitude of his mistake. "I was just having a rough morning, you know," Derek babbled, his words tumbling over each other. "I've been sleeping rough, no job, everything's going wrong, and I took it out on the wrong people. I'm really sorry, Mr. Chan. This is so messed up." Jackie knelt beside Frank Morrison, helping the elderly veteran sit up properly while keeping one eye on Derek. "Sir, can you move your arms and legs? Any sharp pains?" Frank nodded, wincing as he flexed his scraped hands. "I'm okay, just some cuts." "But Buddy," his voice broke as he looked at his service dog, who was still trying to crawl closer despite his obvious pain. Several people in the crowd had called 911, and the distant sound of sirens could be heard approaching through the morning traffic. Derek's eyes darted nervously between Jackie and the phone still recording his every move. "Can we still get that selfie, though?" Derek asked suddenly, his voice brightening as if the idea had just occurred to him. "I mean, this could still go viral in a good way, right? Jackie Chan saves the day. I could be like the reformed bad guy in the story." The request was so tone-deaf, so completely disconnected from the reality of what had just happened, that several people in the crowd actually gasped. Jackie's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went very cold. "Young man," Jackie said quietly, "you just tortured an innocent animal and assaulted an elderly veteran. The fact that you're thinking about social media right now tells me you haven't learned anything from this experience." The sirens grew louder, and within moments, 2 Portland Police Patrol cars pulled up to the bus stop. Derek's face lit up with relief as he saw the officers approaching. Finally, authority figures who would restore the natural order where he was the victim and Jackie was the aggressor. "Officers," Derek called out, pointing at Jackie. "This guy attacked me. I was just asking for directions, and he went crazy. I want to press charges." Sergeant Riley emerged from the lead car, a thick-set man in his 50s whose uniform looked like it had seen better decades. He took in the scene with the weary expression of someone who had dealt with too many street altercations and didn't want to be bothered with the details. "All right, break it up," Riley said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who expected immediate compliance. "What's the problem here?" Multiple voices began speaking at once, witnesses trying to explain what they had seen, Derek insisting he was the victim, Frank Morrison attempting to give his version of events. But Sergeant Riley's attention focused immediately on the most obvious narrative. An elderly Asian man had apparently assaulted a young white American. "You," Riley pointed at Jackie, his hand moving to rest on his service weapon. "Step away from everyone and put your hands where I can see them." Jackie complied without resistance, but several people in the crowd began protesting loudly. "He was defending the veteran," someone shouted. "The punk kicked the service dog," called another. But Sergeant Riley wasn't interested in the crowd's version of events. He had Derek's word that he'd been assaulted. He had an obvious suspect, and that was enough for him. The fact that dozens of witnesses and multiple videos contradicted Derek's story seemed irrelevant. "You're under arrest for assault," Riley announced, reaching for his handcuffs. The morning had taken yet another unexpected turn. The Portland City Jail smelled of disinfectant and desperation, a combination that had soaked into the concrete walls over decades of housing society's unwanted. Jackie Chan sat calmly on the narrow bench in his holding cell, his gray windbreaker folded neatly beside him, his posture suggesting meditation rather than incarceration. For a man who had just been arrested for defending an innocent veteran, he seemed remarkably at peace. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd faced far worse situations in movies, but those had been scripted. This was real life, where corruption could masquerade as justice and good intentions could lead to handcuffs. Still, he'd learned long ago that fighting every battle wasn't wisdom. Knowing which battles to fight was. The heavy door buzzed open, and a woman in her mid-40s strode purposefully into the visiting area. Diane Morrison moved with the efficient energy of someone who had spent years navigating bureaucratic mazes. Her shoulder-length brown hair pulled back practically, her blazer wrinkled from a frantic morning of phone calls and paperwork. "Mr. Chan," she said, settling into the plastic chair across from him. "I'm Diane Morrison, Frank's daughter. I want to thank you for what you did, and I want to apologize for what happened to you because of it." Jackie smiled gently. "How is your father and Buddy?" "Dad's at OHSU getting checked for a concussion. Buddy's at the veterinary hospital. They're doing x-rays, but the vet thinks it's severe bruising, not broken ribs." Diane's voice tightened with controlled anger. "He could have been killed. That animal is my father's lifeline." "Animals often bring out the best and worst in people," Jackie observed. "Your father clearly loves that dog very much." Diane nodded, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "I had to take a cash advance on my credit card to post your bail. $5,000 for defending my father from a thug who should have been arrested himself. The whole system is backwards." "Systems are only as good as the people who operate them," Jackie said. "Tell me about your father." "This morning didn't feel random." Diane's expression darkened. "It wasn't. Dad and other veterans in our neighborhood have been dealing with harassment for months. Not just random encounters, systematic intimidation. Cars vandalized, threatening phone calls, being followed home from the Morrison Center." The Morrison Center, a community space for veterans. Meals, social services, job placement help. It's been their lifeline since Dad's wife, my mother, died 5 years ago. Diane pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. "Look at this." The images showed graffiti spray painted across brick walls. "Old soldiers go home," and "Vietnam losers" in crude block letters. Another photo showed sugar poured into a car's gas tank, and another displayed a window broken by what appeared to be a thrown brick. "The police response has been minimal," Diane continued. "They treat each incident as isolated vandalism rather than a pattern of harassment. But the veterans know better. They recognize organized intimidation when they see it." Jackie studied the photos carefully. "Has anyone identified who's behind this?" "Not specifically, but there's been talk about development pressure. The Morrison Center sits on prime real estate in a neighborhood that's gentrifying rapidly. Some of the older veterans think someone wants them gone." The pieces were falling into place in Jackie's mind. Derek's practiced cruelty, his confidence that he wouldn't face consequences, the way Sergeant Riley had immediately assumed Derek was the victim. This wasn't random street violence. It was part of something larger. "I'd like to meet the other veterans," Jackie said. "If they'll have me." Diane smiled for the first time that morning. "After what you did for Dad, they'll probably make you an honorary member." The Cascade Veterinary Hospital occupied a converted warehouse in southeast Portland, its waiting room decorated with cheerful murals of happy pets that did little to mask the anxiety radiating from pet owners facing expensive medical bills. Jackie and Diane sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs, surrounded by the quiet desperation of people whose beloved animals were fighting for their lives in rooms they couldn't enter. Surgery went well, Dr. Patricia Vance announced as she emerged from the back rooms, still wearing surgical scrubs. The veterinarian was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the particular weariness that came from spending years trying to heal damage that humans inflicted on innocent creatures. Buddy had significant bruising to his ribs and some internal swelling, but no broken bones and no organ damage. He's a tough little guy. His training probably saved him from worse injury. He knew how to protect himself even while being attacked. Jackie felt a weight lift from his chest that he hadn't realized was there. When can we see him? He's awake and asking for his handler. Dr. Vance smiled. Well, as much as a dog can. Ask. He keeps looking toward the door and whining. Service dogs have incredibly strong bonds with their humans. They followed her through a maze of corridors to a recovery room where Buddy lay on a padded table, his golden fur shaved around his ribs where white bandages covered the worst of his injuries. The moment he saw Jackie, his tail began a cautious wag, and his brown eyes brightened with recognition. He remembers you, Diane observed, surprised. Service dogs are usually very focused on their handlers. Jackie approached slowly, letting Buddy sniff his hand before gently stroking the dog's head. Animals remember kindness, he said softly. They also remember cruelty, but they choose to focus on kindness when they find it. Dr. Vance checked Buddy's bandages professionally. He'll need rest and pain medication for about 2 weeks. No vigorous activity, but gentle walks will actually help his recovery. The real concern is emotional trauma. Some animals develop fear responses after violent attacks. What about his ability to work as a service dog? Diane asked, voicing the fear that had been growing in all their minds. Too early to tell. Service dogs are selected for stable temperaments, and his training should help him process this experience. But we'll need to monitor his responses carefully. If he develops fear-based behaviors around strangers or in public spaces, his effectiveness could be compromised. The implications hit them all simultaneously. Buddy wasn't just Frank's companion. He was his medical equipment, as essential as a wheelchair or hearing aid. If Derek's violence had destroyed Buddy's ability to work, he had effectively disabled a disabled veteran. The bills, Diane said quietly, pulling out her phone to check her banking app. I don't know how we're going to. I'll take care of it, Jackie interrupted. All of it. Surgery, medication, follow-up care. It's not charity. It's justice. Dr. Vance excused herself to prepare discharge paperwork, leaving Jackie and Diane alone with the recovering dog. Buddy's eyes tracked between them, his intelligence clearly processing the emotional undercurrents of the conversation. Mr. Chan, Diane said carefully, I appreciate your generosity, but this goes deeper than one incident. The harassment my father and his friends face is systematic. Paying Buddy's medical bills won't stop the next attack. Jackie's expression grew thoughtful. Tell me more about this pattern of intimidation. Diane pulled up photos on her phone again, scrolling through images that painted a picture of escalating harassment. It started about 6 months ago. Small things at first. Veterans would find their cars keyed after leaving the Morrison Center. Then it escalated to phone calls, people following them home, confrontations like what happened to Dad. Have you identified any connections between the incidents? The police haven't found any patterns, Diane said bitterly, but the veterans have. They recognize tactical harassment when they see it. Someone is running a campaign to drive them out of the neighborhood. Jackie studied the photos more carefully, his expression growing serious. This isn't random hatred. This is organized intimidation with a specific goal. Which brings us back to the Morrison Center, Diane said. Prime real estate in a rapidly gentrifying area. If someone wanted to develop that property, they'd need to remove the current occupants first, Jackie finished. And veterans, especially. Older ones dealing with PTSD and limited resources would make easy targets. Buddy whined softly, sensing the tension in the room. Jackie resumed stroking his head, the gentle motion calming both the dog and his own growing anger. I'd like to see this Morrison Center, Jackie said finally, and meet the people who gather there. The Morrison Center occupied a converted warehouse 6 blocks from the bus stop where the morning's violence had unfolded. Red brick walls bore faded patriotic murals depicting eagles and flags, while hand-painted signs announced meal times and support group schedules. The building wore its purpose proudly. This was a place where those who had served their country could find community among others who understood the unique costs of military service. Frank Morrison sat in a wheelchair near the entrance, his head wrapped in a white bandage from his fall, Buddy lying carefully beside him. The golden retriever moved slowly, his bandaged ribs making every breath a conscious effort, but his brown eyes remained alert and focused on his handler. Despite their injuries, both veterans had insisted on coming to the weekly coffee gathering. "Gentlemen, ladies," Frank said as Jackie and Diane approached, "I'd like you to meet the man who saved Buddy's life this morning." The reaction was mixed. About 20 veterans of various ages filled the main room, mostly men in their 60s and 70s, with a few women and some younger faces from more recent conflicts. Some looked up with curiosity, others with skepticism. They'd seen plenty of outsiders come through with promises to help, only to disappear when the cameras stopped rolling. Walter Kowalski, a Korean War veteran whose 72 years hadn't diminished his commanding presence, stood slowly from his folding chair. "Mr. Chan, is it? Frank tells us you put that punk on the ground this morning." "I simply used his own momentum against him," Jackie replied modestly. "Your friend Frank showed much more courage than I did." An uncomfortable silence followed. These were people who had learned to be wary of flattery, especially from celebrities. They'd been used as photo opportunities too many times by politicians and do-gooders who disappeared once the cameras stopped rolling. Maria Santos, a Gulf War veteran whose medical training had made her the unofficial nurse for the group, broke the tension. "Frank says you paid Buddy's veterinary bills." "That wasn't necessary, but it was appreciated." "It was necessary," Jackie said simply. "What happened to Buddy was wrong. What's been happening to all of you is wrong." Bobby Jenkins, a Vietnam-era Navy veteran, laughed bitterly. "Wrong doesn't begin to cover it. We've been living under siege for 6 months, and the cops act like we're making it up." "Tell me about the siege," Jackie said, settling into an empty folding chair as if he had all the time in the world. The stories came slowly at first, then in a flood. Veterans described harassment that followed clear patterns, always when they were alone, always in places without witnesses, always designed to humiliate and intimidate rather than seriously injure. Cars vandalized after evening meetings, threatening phone calls using information that suggested surveillance. Young men following them home, never quite crossing the line into actionable assault. "It's psychological warfare," Walter observed grimly. "Whoever's running this operation understands how to break down morale systematically." Jackie listened carefully, asking pointed questions that revealed his understanding of both tactics and human nature. "Have you noticed any coordination in the timing of these incidents?" "That's what convinced us it wasn't random," Maria said. "The harassment always intensifies before city council meetings or public hearings about neighborhood development. Someone wants us demoralized and scattered when decisions are being made." Through the large windows that faced the street, Jackie could see the neighborhood around them. Coffee shops replacing auto repair shops, yoga studios where hardware stores used to be, luxury condos rising where affordable housing once stood. The Morrison Center sat like an island of the old Portland in a sea of expensive transformation. "Who benefits if this center closes?" Jackie asked. "That's the million-dollar question," Bobby said. "Literally, this property is worth serious money to the right developer." As if summoned by their conversation, movement outside the windows caught their attention. 3 young men stood on the sidewalk across the street, making no effort to hide their surveillance. One of them was Derek Mullins, apparently released on his own recognizance. Another was Craig Novak, Derek's friend from their street harassment crew. The third was a stranger, but his posture and attention suggested professional interest rather than casual curiosity. "Friends of yours?" Jackie asked Frank quietly. Frank's face had gone pale, and Buddy struggled to his feet despite his injuries. A low growl building in his throat, the first aggressive sound any of them had heard from the normally placid service dog. "The one on the left is Derek," Frank said, his voice tight with controlled fear. "The others? I've seen them around the neighborhood lately." Jackie stood and walked to the window, making no effort to hide his observation of the watchers. His presence had an immediate effect. Derek pointed excitedly, pulling out his phone, while the other two men stepped back into the shadows of a nearby alley. They're not trying to hide, Jackie observed. This is meant to be seen. It's intimidation. Theater. The message was clear. The harassment would continue, and now it would include anyone who stood with the veterans. The stakes had just been raised. Jackie stepped outside the Morrison Center with the casual confidence of someone who had faced worse than 3 street thugs in his decades of action work. The afternoon drizzle had resumed, turning the Portland streets slick and gray, but the weather seemed appropriate for the confrontation that was about to unfold. Derek Mullins stood across the street with his companions, his earlier humiliation apparently forgotten in the excitement of seeing Jackie Chan again. He waved his phone enthusiastically, as if the morning's events had been a friendly encounter rather than his arrest for animal cruelty. "Mr. Chan," Derek called out, his voice carrying across the quiet street. "Hey, can we talk? I want to make this right." Craig Novak and the third man, later identified as Justin Hayes, flanked Derek with the practiced positioning of people who knew how to control a situation through implied threat. But they maintained careful distance, smart enough to avoid any action that could be construed as assault while cameras were rolling. Jackie crossed the street with unhurried steps, his hands visible and relaxed, his expression curious rather than confrontational. "You wanted to talk?" Derek's face lit up with the manic energy of someone who believed he could spin any situation to his advantage. "Dude, this morning was crazy, right? But I've been thinking, we could turn this into something positive. You, me? Maybe we do a whole social media campaign about redemption and second chances." The suggestion was so tone-deaf that Craig and Justin exchanged glances, recognizing that their friend was about to say something spectacularly stupid. But Derek was warming to his theme, convinced that his celebrity encounter had opened doors to fame and fortune. "I mean, think about it," Derek continued, pulling out his phone to film himself. Former bully meets Jackie Chan, learns the error of his ways, becomes a better person. It's like a movie. We could get millions of views. Jackie's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested he was cataloging details: the expensive phones, the coordinated positioning, the way Craig and Justin deferred to someone who clearly wasn't the mastermind of their operation. "Tell me about your work," Jackie said conversationally. "What do you do when you're not at bus stops?" Derek's chest puffed with pride. "We're in urban development, helping improve neighborhoods, getting rid of elements that don't fit with the vision for Portland's future." "Elements? Yeah, like..." Derek gestured vaguely toward the Morrison Center. "Places that bring down property values. We help developers identify problem areas and find solutions." Craig stepped forward, recognizing that Derek was revealing more than intended. "What Derek means is we do community outreach. Help people understand when it's time to move on to better opportunities." Jackie's smile was perfectly pleasant. "That sounds like important work. Who do you work for?" "We're independent contractors," Justin said carefully. "We work with various development firms on a project basis." The conversation continued for several minutes, with Jackie playing the role of interested celebrity while the three men gradually revealed more than they intended about their organized campaign against the veterans. They spoke about cleaning up the neighborhood and helping people understand when their time was up, with the casual arrogance of people who believe their actions were justified. Throughout the exchange, Jackie maintained his famous charm, asking questions that seemed like genuine curiosity while actually gathering intelligence. He learned about their daily routines, their methods of identifying targets, and most importantly, their confidence that they were protected from consequences. "You seem very sure that your work won't cause problems for you," Jackie observed. Derek laughed. "We know people. The right people. People who understand that sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make progress. People in law enforcement. People everywhere," Craig said with a smirk. "This city runs on relationships. Mr. Chan's smart people cultivate the right relationships." As the conversation wound down, Jackie noticed a pattern in their behavior: constant checking of phones, coordinated timing, the particular confidence that came from operating within a larger system. These weren't independent thugs. They were foot soldiers in a more sophisticated operation. "Well," Jackie said finally, "thank you for helping me understand the situation better. I'm sure we'll see each other again soon." As he walked back toward the Morrison Center, Derek called after him. Hey, think about that social media thing. This could be huge for both of us. Jackie didn't turn around, but his expression had grown thoughtful. The conversation had confirmed what he'd suspected. The harassment of the veterans was organized, well-funded, and protected by corruption that reached into law enforcement. The morning's incident at the bus stop hadn't been random violence. It had been part of a systematic campaign. Inside the Morrison Center, the veterans had watched the entire exchange through the windows. Their faces reflected a mixture of admiration for Jackie's calm confidence and growing concern about what his involvement might bring down on their community. What did you learn? Walter asked as Jackie rejoined them. Enough to know this is bigger than random harassment, Jackie replied, and enough to know we're going to need a plan. That evening, Diane Morrison's apartment became an impromptu war room. Jackie sat at her small dining table, surrounded by printouts, maps, and legal documents that painted a picture of systematic neighborhood transformation. Her laptop screen glowed with property records, news articles, and corporate filings that revealed the hidden machinery behind Portland's rapid gentrification. Briggs Development, Diane said, pointing to a name that appeared repeatedly in the documents. They've purchased 7 properties within a 4-block radius of the Morrison Center in the past 18 months. Jackie studied the pattern of acquisitions, noting how they formed an almost perfect circle around the veterans' community space. Tony Briggs. What do we know about him? Real estate developer, politically connected, specializes in what he calls urban renewal projects. Diane pulled up a news article on her screen. Look at this, same pattern in Southeast Division Street 3 years ago. Harassment of long-term residents, mysterious fires, sudden mass evictions. 6 months later, luxury condos. The parallels were undeniable. Jackie read through accounts of elderly residents intimidated into selling, small businesses vandalized until they closed, community centers forced to shut down due to safety concerns. Each project had followed the same blueprint: destabilize the existing community, then swoop in with development plans that promised to improve the neighborhood. Here's the connection, Diane said, highlighting a section of text. Sergeant Riley's brother-in-law, Michael Riley, works as a project manager for Briggs Development. He's listed on the corporate filings. Jackie sat back in his chair, the pieces falling into place. So when Derek kicked Buddy this morning, he wasn't just being cruel. He was doing his job. And when Sergeant Riley arrested you instead of Derek, he was protecting a company asset. Diane's voice was tight with controlled anger. They've turned harassment into a business model. Frank Morrison sat in Diane's recliner, Buddy curled carefully at his feet. The elderly veteran had been quiet throughout their research, but now he spoke up. I've seen this before. Different country, different war, but the same tactics. Isolate the enemy, break their morale, make them want to surrender rather than fight. The difference, Jackie said thoughtfully, is that this enemy has legal protection and media manipulation on their side. Traditional resistance won't work. Diane pulled up another screen, Briggs Development's website, featuring glossy renderings of modern apartment complexes and shopping centers. The company's mission statement spoke about revitalizing neighborhoods and bringing prosperity to underutilized areas. Look at this, she said, clicking through a gallery of completed projects. Every single one displaced existing communities. Senior housing demolished for luxury condos. Family restaurants replaced by artisanal coffee shops. Community centers torn down for boutique shopping. Jackie studied the before and after photos with growing anger. Each transformation represented dozens of families displaced, communities scattered, generations of neighborhood history erased for profit. The Morrison Center wasn't just a building. It was the last stand of a way of life that someone had decided was inconvenient. We need to expose this, Diane said. Get media attention, pressure the city council, force them to investigate. Media attention could work, Jackie agreed, but it needs to be the right kind. Something that can't be spun or buried. Frank shifted in his chair, wincing from his morning injuries. What do you have in mind? Jackie's expression grew thoughtful. I'm thinking about using what I do best, entertainment. But this time, the message will be more important than the show. A demonstration? Diane asked. A celebration, Jackie corrected. Something that shows the community's strength, not just their victimization. something that makes it impossible for Briggs to continue painting the veterans as problems to be solved. The idea began to take shape as they talked. A public event at the Morrison Center, part martial arts demonstration, part community celebration, part media spectacle. Jackie's celebrity status would guarantee coverage, but the real stars would be the veterans themselves, telling their stories and showing their dignity. If we do this right, Jackie said, we can change the narrative completely. Instead of displaced victims, you become a community worth preserving. 1 week later, the Morrison Center had been transformed. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from the rafters, while tables laden with food stretched along the walls. Local media vans lined the street outside, their satellite dishes reaching toward a sky that had finally cleared after days of Portland rain. The parking lot buzzed with activity as veterans from across the city arrived to show support for their embattled community. Jackie stood on a makeshift stage constructed from shipping pallets, addressing a crowd of nearly 200 people. His simple black outfit and confident posture commanded attention. But this wasn't the Jackie Chan of Hollywood blockbusters. This was a man using his platform for something far more important than entertainment. Ladies and gentlemen, Jackie said into a borrowed microphone, I came to Portland for a quiet visit. Instead, I found something much more valuable. I found heroes who are still fighting for their community. The crowd responded with enthusiastic applause as Jackie gestured toward the veterans gathered on the stage behind him. Frank Morrison stood proudly with Buddy at his side, the golden retriever's ribs still bandaged but his tail wagging at the positive energy surrounding them. These men and women served our country with honor, Jackie continued. Now they serve their community with the same dedication. They deserve our respect, not harassment. They deserve protection, not intimidation. Channel 8 News had positioned their cameras prominently, while reporters from the Oregonian and Portland Mercury took notes. Social media influencers live-streamed to thousands of followers, their phones capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the feel-good story of the week. Walter Kowalski stepped forward to the microphone, his Korean War Service ribbons pinned to his chest. Mr. Chan asked me to tell you about this place, he said, his voice carrying the authority of 7 decades. The Morrison Center isn't just a building. It's where Bobby Jenkins learned to read again after his stroke. It's where Maria Santos teaches other women veterans about benefits they've earned. It's where Frank Morrison found family after his wife died. Each veteran took a turn sharing their story, how the center had provided not just services, but community. How it had been their anchor in a city that was changing too fast around them. How they'd found purpose in helping younger veterans navigate the transition from military to civilian life. The crowd grew emotional as Bobby Jenkins described learning to speak again after his stroke, with other veterans patiently working with him until the words returned. Maria Santos talked about the women veterans who gathered every Thursday to share experiences that male-dominated VFW posts often didn't understand. Raymond Clark explained how his intelligence background helped younger veterans navigate VA bureaucracy. Then Jackie took the microphone again. Now I want to show you something about strength and community working together. What followed was unlike any martial arts demonstration Jackie had ever performed. Instead of a solo exhibition of his skills, he brought veterans onto the stage. To participate, he showed Walter how to use an attacker's momentum against them, demonstrating on Derek's friend Craig, who had foolishly shown up to heckle and found himself volunteering as a very cooperative practice dummy. He taught Maria basic self-defense moves while explaining how awareness and confidence were more important than physical strength. He worked with Frank, showing how someone with mobility limitations could still protect themselves using leverage and positioning. Martial arts isn't about fighting, Jackie explained to the crowd. It's about balance, respect, and protecting those who need protection. These veterans understand that better than anyone. The demonstration was both entertaining and educational, but more importantly, it was empowering. The veterans who participated stood taller, moved with more confidence, smiled with genuine joy at discovering they were stronger than they believed. Local news stations carried the story on their evening broadcasts, showing footage of Jackie teaching self-defense to elderly veterans while hundreds of Portland residents cheered. The narrative was perfect. Beloved action star supports local heroes. Community comes together to celebrate service and sacrifice. The The Morrison Center raised $15,000 in donations that day, enough to fund operations for 6 months. Jackie announced he was personally establishing a scholarship fund for veterans' children and grandchildren. Mayor Patricia Coleman arrived unexpectedly, drawn by the media attention and the opportunity to associate herself with such positive publicity. The city of Portland stands behind our veterans, the mayor declared, promising a full investigation into the harassment reports and city support. For the Morrison Center's continued operation, as the sun set over the celebration, Jackie felt genuinely satisfied. They had changed the conversation, shifted public opinion, and given the veterans a platform to tell their own stories. The crowd began to disperse, but the energy remained. This community had found its voice. Then Derek Mullins and his crew appeared at the edge of the parking lot, no longer bothering to hide their surveillance. They filmed everything, their expressions suggesting that the celebration had been noted by people who wouldn't appreciate the shift in narrative. The war for the Morrison Center was far from over. Jackie's phone buzzed insistently at 3:47 a.m., dragging him from deep sleep in his downtown Portland hotel room. Diane Morrison's voice was strained with panic and smoke inhalation when he answered. "The center's on fire," she gasped. Dad was inside. They took him to OHSU. By the time Jackie reached the scene, the Morrison Center was a skeleton of blackened beams reaching toward the pre-dawn sky like accusing fingers. Portland Fire and Rescue had contained the blaze, but the building that had housed so much hope and community was now nothing more than smoking ruins and broken dreams. Fire Chief Karen Walsh stood near the command vehicle, her soot-stained face grim as she spoke with investigators. "Accelerant patterns suggest multiple ignition points," she was saying as Jackie approached. This wasn't accidental. The street was chaos. Veterans who had driven through the night stood in clusters, some weeping openly as they watched their community center reduced to ash and memory. Maria Santos held a sobbing Helen Washington, while Walter Kowalski stared at the destruction with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too many things burn. "Where's Frank?" Jackie asked Diane, who stood wrapped in a hospital blanket. Despite the mild morning temperature, OHSU emergency room, smoke inhalation, possible concussion from falling debris. He was staying late to clean up after the celebration. Her voice broke. If he hadn't been there, no one would have called 911 in time to save the neighboring buildings, Walter said grimly. Frank probably saved half the block by raising the alarm. Jackie studied the scene with the analytical eye he'd developed through decades of action sequences. The fire had been thorough but not random. It had consumed the main meeting room and kitchen while leaving the storage areas relatively intact. Someone had wanted to destroy the heart of the community while preserving potential evidence of their crime. "Any witnesses?" Jackie asked Chief Walsh. Anonymous 911 call at 2:15 a.m. reported the fire. Caller hung up before we could get details. By the time our first truck arrived, the building was fully involved. A Portland police sedan pulled up, and Sergeant Riley emerged with the unhurried gait of someone who was going through motions rather than conducting a real investigation. He surveyed the scene with barely concealed satisfaction before approaching the group of veterans. "Looks like you folks had some bad luck," Riley said, his tone suggesting anything but sympathy. "These old buildings, faulty wiring, space heaters, left on overnight. Accidents happen." "This wasn't an accident," Maria Santos said sharply. "Someone burned down our center deliberately." Riley shrugged. "I'm sure the fire department will investigate thoroughly. Meanwhile, you might want to think about finding somewhere else to gather. This neighborhood's changing, and maybe it's time you folks adapted to reality." The callousness of his response sparked anger among the veterans, but before anyone could respond, a local news van pulled up. Channel 8's morning crew had monitored police and fire scanners, and the story of the Morrison Center fire would lead their 6 a.m. broadcast. Reporter Jennifer Liu approached with her cameraman, recognizing Jackie. Immediately, "Mr. Chan, can you comment on the destruction of the Morrison Center where you held your celebration yesterday?" Jackie faced the camera with the same calm authority he'd shown throughout the crisis. This community center was destroyed by people who believe that elderly veterans are obstacles to profit. The men and women who gathered here served our country with honor. They deserve protection, not arson. "Are you suggesting this was deliberately set?" Liu asked, her journalist instincts recognizing a bigger story. I'm saying that when vulnerable, people are systematically harassed for months, and then their gathering place burns down the night after they receive positive media attention. It's hard to believe in coincidence. Sergeant Riley stepped into camera range, clearly uncomfortable with Jackie's implications. Mr. Chan is obviously upset about the fire, but we have no evidence of arson at this time. Sometimes these old buildings just burn. The live broadcast was electric television, beloved action star suggesting conspiracy, while local police official dismisses concerns. Social media exploded with speculation and outrage as the footage was shared thousands of times within hours. But the media attention couldn't change the fundamental reality. The Morrison Center was gone, Frank Morrison was hospitalized, and the community that had found its voice just 24 hours earlier was now scattered and demoralized. As the news crews packed up their equipment, Tony Briggs appeared on the scene. The developer surveyed the destruction with the calculating expression of someone assessing opportunity rather than tragedy. Such a shame, he told a lingering reporter. I've been hoping to help this neighborhood recover from the blight of abandoned buildings. Perhaps now we can move forward with development that really serves the community. By noon, Briggs Development had issued a press release offering to purchase the Morrison Center property to help the community recover from this tragic loss. The OHSU emergency room hummed with the controlled chaos of a Level 1 trauma center. But Frank Morrison looked small and fragile propped up in his hospital bed. Oxygen tubes snaked around his weathered face, and his eyes held the glassy shine of strong pain medication. Buddy was missing, last seen running from the burning building. In panic, his location unknown for 12 agonizing hours. They took him, Frank whispered, his voice barely audible above the beeping monitors. He gripped Jackie's hand with surprising strength, his words urgent despite his condition. Before the fire started, I saw them take Buddy. Diane leaned closer, her face pale with exhaustion and worry. Dad, who took him? What did you see? Frank's eyes struggled to focus, but his memory of the trauma remained crystal clear. I was mopping the kitchen when I heard voices outside. Derek and that other one, Craig. They had Buddy cornered by the dumpster. He wasn't running away. They had him on a leash. Jackie's expression darkened. They took him before setting the fire. Insurance, Frank managed. Heard them talking. Said they needed to make sure the evidence didn't bark at the wrong time. Derek was laughing about it. The implications struck them all simultaneously. Buddy hadn't fled in panic from the fire. He'd been kidnapped beforehand to prevent him from alerting Frank to the intruders. The arsonists had planned meticulously, removing the one witness who might have raised an alarm early enough to save the building. Dr. Elizabeth Chun entered the room, her scrubs still bearing traces of the emergency surgery she'd just completed. Mr. Morrison is stable, but he needs rest. The smoke inhalation wasn't severe, but at his age, we're monitoring for complications. Doctor, Diane said carefully, my father believes his service dog was taken before the fire started. Buddy's specially trained. He would never abandon his handler during a crisis. Dr. Chin's expression grew concerned. Service animals have incredibly strong bonds with their handlers. If Buddy is missing, it's definitely contributing to your father's stress levels. Recovery will be much more difficult without his support animal. Outside Frank's room, Jackie and Diane huddled with Walter Kowalski and Maria Santos, who had driven to the hospital as soon as they'd heard about Frank's condition. The destruction of their community center had left all the veterans feeling vulnerable, but losing Buddy felt like a personal attack on their most innocent member. We need to find him, Maria said firmly. That dog saved my life last winter when I had a diabetic episode at the center. Someone needs to save his. Walter nodded grimly. But where do we start? Derek and his crew aren't exactly operating out of a listed business address. Jackie's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. If you want the dog back, meet at Burnside Bridge at midnight. Come alone, or we'll put him down like the worthless mutt he is. The message was clearly from Derek or his associates, but it revealed their desperation more than their strength. By kidnapping Buddy, they'd crossed a line that even corrupt cops would have trouble justifying. Animal cruelty was a felony in Oregon, and holding a service animal hostage would generate sympathy even from people who didn't care about veteran issues. It's a trap, Walter observed after reading the message. They want to isolate you, probably get video of you doing something they can use against you. Of course it's a trap, Jackie agreed. But they have Buddy, and Frank won't recover properly without him. Sometimes you have to walk into a trap to spring it from the inside. Diane shook her head. You can't go alone. These people have already committed arson and kidnapping. They're not going to stop at assault if they think you're threatening their operation. She's right, Maria added. We lost our building, but we're not going to lose you too. As they debated options, Jackie's phone rang. The caller ID showed Portland Mayor Patricia Coleman's office. Mr. Chan, the mayor's voice was carefully controlled. I understand you've been making some serious accusations about the Morrison Center. Fire. I think we need to have a conversation before this situation gets out of hand. The subtext was clear. Powerful people were growing uncomfortable with Jackie's public statements about corruption and conspiracy. The pressure was building from multiple directions, designed to make him back down or leave town quietly. I'm not leaving until Buddy is safe and the people responsible for this are held accountable, Jackie said firmly. After ending the call, he looked at the determined faces around him. These veterans had lost their gathering place, but they hadn't lost their fighting spirit. And for the first time since arriving in Portland, Jackie realized he wasn't going to solve this problem alone. We're going to get Buddy back, he announced. All of us. Together. 3 days after the fire, Jackie sat in his hotel room staring at packed suitcases. The Portland Tribune's morning headline read, Celebrities' Conspiracy Claims Divide City. Below it, a photo showed him pointing accusingly while Mayor Coleman looked on disapprovingly. The media narrative had shifted overnight. What began as heartwarming coverage of veterans and their famous supporter had transformed into questions about outside agitators making unsubstantiated claims. Editorial writers questioned whether Jackie's Hollywood perspective truly understood Portland's complex development challenges. Even some veterans had grown distant. The Morrison Center's destruction had scattered their community, and without a central gathering place, the bonds that held them together were fraying. Some whispered that Jackie's involvement had escalated the situation beyond what they could handle. Frank remained hospitalized, his condition stable, but his recovery slowed by depression and the absence of Buddy. The kidnapped service dog's fate remained unknown despite police promises to investigate. Sergeant Riley had dismissed the kidnapping claims as stress-induced confusion from an elderly trauma victim. Diane knocked softly on the hotel room door. Dad wants to see you, she said when Jackie answered. Before you leave. I wasn't planning to leave, Jackie replied, though his packed bag suggested otherwise. The mayor's office called him. They suggested it might be best for everyone if you return to your normal life. Jackie looked at his reflection in the hotel window. For the first time since arriving in Portland, he wondered if his presence was helping or making things worse. Frank Morrison's hospital room felt smaller with each passing day. The elderly veteran sat propped against pillows, his face gaunt from poor sleep and worry. The absence of Buddy created a hollow space that no amount of medical equipment could fill. They want you to leave, Frank said without preamble when Jackie entered. The mayor, the police, probably half the city council by now. Jackie settled into the bedside chair, noting how Frank's hands shook more without Buddy's calming presence. What do you want? I want my dog back. I want the people who burned down our center to face justice. I want to feel safe walking to the grocery store. Frank's voice cracked. I want things that probably aren't possible anymore. Frank, I can't undo what happened, but I won't abandon you. Or Buddy. The older man studied Jackie's face. You feel responsible. I organized that celebration. I brought media attention. Maybe if I'd been more careful. Stop. Frank's voice carried surprising strength. You know what the difference is between you and them? You care about people you don't have to care about. They hurt people for money. Through the window, they could see protesters gathering in the hospital parking lot. Not supporters, but angry citizens who blamed Jackie for bringing unwanted attention to their city. Signs read, Hollywood go home, and stop exploiting veterans. Frank noticed Jackie watching the crowd. Sometimes doing the right thing makes everything harder before it gets better. My drill sergeant used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite the fear. What if my acting makes things worse for you and the other veterans? Frank managed a weak smile. Then we'll face it together. That's what soldiers do. Evening shadows stretched across Diane Morrison's apartment as an unlikely war council gathered. Around her dining table, Walter Kowalski spread city maps across the surface while Maria Santos monitored police scanners on her phone. Helen Washington worked at a laptop, her Air Force communications training evident in her systematic approach to gathering intelligence. Found something, Helen announced, highlighting an address on her screen. Property records show Briggs Development. Owns a construction site in industrial southeast. Perfect place to hold a dog without neighbors complaining about barking. Jackie studied the aerial photos she'd pulled up. The site was isolated, surrounded by vacant lots and abandoned warehouses. Multiple access roads would make surveillance difficult, but also provide escape routes. It's too obvious, Walter observed with Korean War tactical experience. If they're smart enough to orchestrate this whole campaign, they wouldn't use their own property to hold evidence. Unless they want us to find it, Maria added grimly. Draw us into a confrontation they can control. Diane emerged from the kitchen carrying coffee, her face showing the strain of 3 sleepless nights. Dad's getting worse without Buddy. The doctors say his recovery is being compromised by the separation. The weight of Frank's deteriorating condition pressed on all of them. Service dogs weren't pets. They were medical equipment, as essential as medication or mobility aids. Buddy's kidnapping was slowly killing Frank through stress and separation anxiety. Jackie's phone buzzed with another anonymous text. 24 hours to leave town or the dog dies. Your choice, movie star. Helen looked up from her laptop. I've been monitoring Derek's social media. He's been posting from various locations around the construction site. Either he's incredibly stupid or incredibly confident. Maybe both, Jackie mused. What if we gave them what they think they want? The room fell silent as Jackie outlined his emerging plan. Instead of trying to rescue Buddy secretly, they would walk directly into the trap, but on their terms, with backup and with the kind of preparation that military veterans understood better than street thugs. It's risky, Walter admitted, but it's better than waiting for them to hurt Buddy to prove their point. For the first time in days, Jackie felt something other than guilt. These veterans hadn't given up, they'd regrouped. The next morning brought an unexpected discovery that changed everything. Helen Washington arrived at Diane's apartment with a manila folder thick with documents and a grim expression that spoke of sleepless research. Security footage, she announced, spreading still images across the table. From the building next to the Morrison Center. The owner finally agreed to share it after seeing the news coverage. The photographs were damning. Time-stamped at 1:47 a.m., they clearly showed Derek Mullins and Craig Novak approaching the Morrison Center carrying gas cans. A third image captured Derek dragging a leashed Buddy toward a white pickup truck parked in the shadows. This proves kidnapping and arson, Diane said, studying the images. Why haven't you taken this to the police? Helen's laugh was bitter. I tried. Sergeant Riley said the images were too unclear to constitute evidence. Claimed the timestamp could be manipulated. Jackie examined the photos more carefully, noting details the others might have missed. Look at the truck's license plate. It's partially visible in this shot. Already ran it, Helen confirmed. Registered to Briggs Development. Company vehicle. The implications crystallized. This wasn't just street-level harassment anymore. The kidnapping and arson were company operations, planned and executed using corporate resources. Tony Briggs had escalated from intimidation to felonies. He's desperate, Walter observed. Yesterday's celebration showed the community could fight back. Destroying the center was meant to scatter us, but now he's trapped holding evidence that could destroy him. Maria Santos had been quiet throughout the discussion, but now she spoke with the authority of someone who had seen combat. Desperate. People make mistakes, but they also become more dangerous. Jackie's phone rang, Mayor Coleman's office again. This time, the message was blunt. Leave Portland within 24 hours or face charges for inciting public disturbance. The corruption reached higher than any of them had imagined. They're closing ranks, Diane observed, trying to force you out before the truth emerges. But they made one crucial error, Jackie said, studying the security footage again. They kept Buddy alive. As long as he's alive, he's evidence of their crimes. And as long as there's evidence, there's hope for justice. Frank's voice finished from the doorway. Against doctor's orders, he discharged himself from the hospital, unwilling to remain helpless while his dog remained in danger. The real fight was about to begin. The industrial district of southeast Portland transformed into a ghost town after sunset. Abandoned warehouses cast long shadows under flickering streetlights, while the distant hum of freight trains provided an ominous soundtrack to the night's operation. Jackie moved through the Briggs Development construction site like liquid shadow, his decades of martial arts training evident in every silent footstep. Helen Washington's technical expertise had proved invaluable during reconnaissance. Using her Air Force communications background, she'd hacked the construction site's basic security system, creating blind spots in camera coverage that allowed Jackie to penetrate the perimeter undetected. Walter Kowalski and Raymond Clark had positioned themselves at strategic overwatch points around the site, their military experience ensuring comprehensive coverage of all escape routes. The construction site sprawled across 3 acres of industrial wasteland, filled with heavy machinery, stacked building materials, and half-completed concrete foundations. Jackie navigated the maze using skills developed through countless action sequences, treating the environment as an elaborate obstacle course where every crane arm, paint bucket, and length of scaffolding represented potential tools for creative problem-solving. Maria Santos waited in the getaway vehicle 3 blocks away, monitoring police scanners and maintaining radio contact with the team. Her medical training would be crucial if anyone was injured during the extraction, but her steady presence also provided psychological anchor for the operation. These veterans had learned to rely on each other, and tonight's mission was no different. The trailer where Buddy was being held sat at the construction site center, isolated but visible from multiple angles. Exactly the kind of trap Derek and his associates would consider clever. Jackie approached from the blind side, using a concrete mixer as cover while he assessed the situation. Muffled barking confirmed Buddy's presence inside the trailer, but the sound carried the distressed quality of an animal in pain or extreme stress. 3 years of partnership with Frank had taught the golden retriever to remain calm in difficult situations, but prolonged captivity by people who viewed him as disposable property had obviously taken its toll. Jackie's earpiece crackled with Walter's voice. Movement on the north perimeter. 3 vehicles approaching fast. The trap was springing exactly as anticipated. Derek, Craig, and Justin were arriving for their confrontation with Jackie, confident that isolation and superior numbers would give them control of the situation. They had no idea that 5 military veterans were coordinating their own operation with precision that street thugs couldn't imagine. Positions confirmed. Raymond's voice reported through the radio network. All exits covered. You're clear to proceed. Jackie approached the trailer door, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether Buddy lived or died, and whether justice would finally catch up with the people who had terrorized Portland's veteran community. The trailer door yielded to Jackie's lockpicking skills, a talent developed during years of action movie preparation that proved surprisingly practical in real-world applications. Inside, Buddy lay on a pile of dirty blankets, his golden fur matted and his usual bright demeanor replaced by the anxious panting of prolonged stress. "Easy, boy," Jackie whispered, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "I'm here to take you home to Frank." Buddy's recognition was immediate and overwhelming. The service dog struggled to his feet despite obvious weakness, his tail wagging with desperate joy as he realized rescue had finally arrived. Jackie quickly examined him for injuries, finding evidence of dehydration and neglect, but nothing requiring immediate medical intervention. The reunion was interrupted by the roar of approaching vehicles. Derek, Craig, and Justin had arrived in 2 pickup trucks and a sedan, their headlights sweeping across the construction site as they searched for their celebrity target. Jackie could hear Derek's voice echoing through the industrial landscape, calling out taunts designed to draw him into the open. "Jackie Chan, we know you're here. Come out and let's finish this like men." Jackie secured a makeshift leash around Buddy's collar, then activated his radio. "Package secured. Initiating extraction." "Negative." Walter's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Multiple hostiles between you and extraction points. They've got the site surrounded." Through the trailer's small window, Jackie could see Craig and Justin taking positions that blocked the most obvious escape routes. Derek stood in the center of the site, phone in hand, apparently live streaming his confrontation with the famous action star. The narcissist couldn't resist turning even this criminal moment into content for social media. This is what happens when Hollywood celebrities think they can come into our city and cause trouble. Derek announced to his phone's camera. Jackie Chan thinks he's some kind of hero, but he's about to learn that this isn't a movie. Jackie studied the construction site's layout, his mind automatically cataloging every piece of equipment and structural element that could be used defensively. Years of choreographing fight scenes had taught him to see any environment as a collection of tools and opportunities. Change of plans, he radioed to his team. I'm going to give them the confrontation they want, but on my terms. Be ready to move when I create a distraction. Negative, Raymond's voice responded immediately. Too risky. We extract together or not at all. But Jackie was already moving, securing Buddy in the trailer's safest corner before stepping outside to face Derek's challenge. The construction site became an arena, floodlights casting dramatic shadows as the confrontation that had been building for days finally reached its climax. You want a show? Jackie called out, his voice carrying across the industrial wasteland. Let me teach you the difference between entertainment and justice. The final battle was about to begin, with everything, Buddy's life, the veterans' community, and the exposure of Portland's corruption, hanging in the balance. The construction site transformed into an elaborate arena as Derek, Craig, and Justin spread out to surround Jackie, their confidence bolstered by superior numbers and familiar territory. Derek held his phone high, live streaming to what he believed would be his moment of viral triumph. The night he defeated Jackie Chan and proved that celebrity status meant nothing in the real world. Ladies and gentlemen, we're live from Portland, where Jackie Chan thought he could mess with the wrong people. Derek announced to his phone's camera. This old man is about to learn that real Americans don't back down. Jackie moved through the construction site with fluid precision, turning the industrial landscape into his choreographed masterpiece. A paint mixer became a shield, deflecting Craig's clumsy tackle. Scaffolding pipes transformed into bow staff weapons, their length keeping multiple attackers at bay simultaneously. Construction materials that were meant to build became tools for creative defense. The livestream captured everything. Derek's overconfident taunts, Jackie's impossible agility for a 71-year-old man, and most importantly, the three men's admission that they were holding Buddy hostage as part of their harassment campaign against Portland's veterans. We've been cleaning up this neighborhood for months. Derek boasted to his phone's camera between attacks, getting rid of the losers and freeloaders who don't belong in the new Portland. This dog was just the beginning. Jackie used Derek's need to perform for the camera against him, drawing him into increasingly elaborate sequences that showcased the younger man's incompetence while documenting his criminal confessions. Every word was being broadcast live to thousands of viewers who were rapidly sharing the stream across social media platforms. Craig attempted to corner Jackie near a concrete foundation, but found himself gently redirected into a pile of sand. That left him sputtering and disoriented. Justin tried to use a length of rebar as a weapon, only to have Jackie's superior technique turn his own momentum against him, sending him tumbling harmlessly into a safety net. Through his earpiece, Jackie heard Helen's excited voice. Streams gone viral. 50,000 viewers and climbing. Portland Police Dispatch is being flooded with calls. The construction site's isolation, which Derek had chosen to prevent interference, now worked against him. The live stream provided undeniable evidence of the conspiracy, complete with confessions, criminal activity, and documentation of Buddy's kidnapping. You can't hide behind your movie star status forever, Derek screamed, his earlier confidence cracking as Jackie continued to outmaneuver him effortlessly. I'm not hiding behind anything, Jackie replied calmly, using a crane cable to swing gracefully between levels of scaffolding. I'm just showing people who you really are. As if summoned by his words, the construction site suddenly blazed with flashing red and blue lights. Portland police had arrived in force, but these weren't Sergeant Riley's corrupt officers. The live stream had generated too much public attention for the conspiracy to contain. The Real Justice was finally beginning. 2 months later, the rebuilt Morrison Center gleamed in the afternoon sunshine, its red brick walls now bearing new murals depicting eagles soaring over mountains, symbols of resilience and renewal that reflected the community's journey through crisis to victory. The dedication ceremony had drawn hundreds of supporters, but the real celebration was quieter, more personal. Frank Morrison sat on a bench outside the center's main entrance, Buddy lying contentedly beside him in the warm spring air. The golden retriever showed no lasting effects from his ordeal, his service dog training having helped him process the trauma with remarkable resilience. If anything, his bond with Frank had grown stronger, their relationship deepened by surviving separation and fear. Jackie approached from the parking lot, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the center's new cafe, a business venture run by Bobby Jenkins, whose speech had fully returned through patient rehabilitation and community support. The martial arts legend had remained in Portland far longer than originally planned, discovering that this small community had given him something Hollywood never could: genuine purpose. The federal trials start next week, Jackie said, settling onto the bench beside Frank. The prosecutor says they have enough evidence to convict the entire network. Tony Briggs sat in federal custody, his development empire crumbling as investigations revealed decades of corruption, bribery, and intimidation tactics. Sergeant Riley had been fired and indicted, his badge stripped along with his pension. Derek, Craig, and Justin faced multiple felony charges, their live-streamed confessions having eliminated any possibility of plea bargains. Justice feels different than I expected, Frank observed, watching veterans and community members flow in and out of the center. Quieter, more like healing than victory. The Morrison Center had become something greater in its rebuilding, not just a veterans facility, but a true community hub where elderly residents, young families, and everyone in between found common ground. The crisis had awakened Portland's conscience about gentrification and the treatment of vulnerable populations. Jackie had established more than just a scholarship fund. His ongoing presence had created a bridge between generations and cultures, teaching self-defense classes that drew participants from across the city. The lessons weren't just about martial arts. They were about confidence, community, and the idea that ordinary people could stand up to powerful interests when they worked together. Diane says you're thinking about staying permanently, Frank said with a slight smile. This feels more like home than anywhere I've lived in decades, Jackie admitted. Besides, Walter says he needs help teaching the advanced classes. Buddy raised his head and sniffed the air, his tail beginning a gentle wag. Moments later, Diane Morrison appeared around the corner, followed by a stream of children from the center's new after-school program. The kids surrounded Jackie immediately, chattering excitedly about their upcoming martial arts demonstration. As the afternoon progressed into evening, the 3 companions, Frank, Jackie, and Buddy, remained on their bench, watching the community they had helped protect thrive and grow. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of hope, and for the first time in months, everything felt exactly as it should be. The fight for justice had ended, but the work of building community would continue forever. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.